Welcome, my YouTubers. I'm so excited you joined me today on My Life as a Landlord. Before I start recording this episode, I just want to personally thank you for taking an interest in your education as a landlord, as a tenant, real estate developer, real estate investor, or just generally watching the Salisburys in general for humor. I hope you do learn something today, and this YouTube thing is working for me. It's relatively new, so if it's not working for you and you've got some different ideas on how I can improve it, please let me know. You can jump on the Facebook group, My Life as a Landlord, or you can tell me in the comments of the YouTube video itself. Either way, please reach out because I do want to provide value right away. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. Here we go. Hello there, and welcome to My Life as a Landlord. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm really excited because I'm getting the hang of this YouTube thing. So if you'd rather watch the episode instead of listen, you can do so. Go to YouTube and listen under the channel is My Life as a Landlord, and check it out. Today's episode is number 37. This is a tenant perspective. And the episode name is They Kept My Deposit. So you guessed it, we're going to talk all about today as a tenant. If the landlord has kept your deposit, what do you do? This is an ongoing rotation of 5 predictable topics that are relevant to both US and Canadians. Last week was a landlord topic, which was standard forms. Next week is a real estate development topic. And here we go. Intro of 3 points. So the first 3 points. First of all, if you have departed a unit as a tenant and you've got your landlord has your deposit, your security deposit or your pet damage deposit or some kind of deposit or deposits from when you started your tenancy and you've departed, and well, now what? Right? All you know is that you haven't gotten your money back. So the first thing you got to do is you've got to gather some info. Then, has there been any communication between you and the landlord or the property manager? Let's face it, this might be a property manager. And at what point do you take action? Right? That's the question then is, and then what action do you take? Right? They kept my deposit. Now, what do you do? Okay, so gather some info. Let's jump into this. So you departed the unit, the landlord or property management kept the deposit, and let's hope you did a move out walkthrough with a condition inspection in writing, which is the proper way to do it. You didn't just leave the keys on the counter and send them a text and said, see you, bye. Because now we're talking about getting your deposit back. Now, let me just take an aside here for a second. A deposit is not rent. A deposit is not rent. Rent is something that is monthly payment, monthly upkeep. A deposit is something that is a long-term promise to the landlord that you are going to pay on time, that you're going to pay, that you're not going to skip out on the last month of rent. You're going to keep the condition of the unit proper, right? That you're not going to trash the unit. This is your promise to the landlord. That promise, if you are looking at your financial aspect of it, is called a liability. It's a liability for the landlord, but it's an asset for the tenant. But what's confusing is it's still money, right? It's still money. Rent is paid in money. Your deposit is paid in money, but a deposit is not the same as rent. It's not rent. And a lot of tenants just go, oh yeah, well, I'm not paying my last month. Just take my deposit and pay my last. No. Your rent is your rent. You pay rent for your last month, and then we discuss the deposit. You don't just take it into you don't take the deposit for last month's rent. They're not the same thing. They're both money, but they're not the same bucket. Okay? They're not the same. Okay, so let's talk about how you as the tenant departed the unit. Did you give your proper notice? Did you pay the last month's rent as rent? You didn't just say, take my deposit as rent. That doesn't work. When you moved in, did you do a written condition inspection with either the property manager or the landlord. Did you guys write down any known damage or not? And then 3, did you do a proper move out inspection? And as a last resort, you can take photos with a timestamp. Now, if you look at the majority of different housing laws, written condition inspections are the only way that you're going to be able to adhere the condition. However, if you take photos, like if you're a tenant and you're taking photos of damage that's existing when you move in, and there's a date timestamp, which most smartphones at this point have that, then if you don't have a written condition inspection, then there is an argument that you can prove or at least show what the condition was at the time of your move-in. Now, arbitration, a judge, somebody could say, no, that's not correct. It's just your way of trying to preserve the condition of the unit. Now, the same can be said at move out, but you've got to be careful because you want to do that walkthrough with your landlord. You want to go through and say, hey, wait a minute, this mark on the floor was there when I was, and tenants always say that anyway. I mean, I just did a move out myself this week, and oh, that was like that when I moved in. That was like, really, let's look at the video. Let's look at the condition inspection form. Because if it's not noted on the condition inspection form, is it willful damage or is it normal wear and tear? We're going to talk about that here in a second. Okay. I cannot stress to you as a tenant how important it is that you have a written condition inspection, both for move in and then move out. Okay. You must do that. And you cannot just say, take my deposit as last month's rent. Does not work like that. I don't care where you are in North America or Canada, you cannot do that, okay? So you've got to gather your info. Did you do all of this stuff for the departure properly? Did you do it properly? If you did, great, okay? Then you're way ahead of the game, because I know a lot of landlords and tenants that do not do this properly, and then it ends up being a big fight, which we're going to talk about that big fight here shortly. So when you have, let's say you move out, you as a tenant, you've turned over the unit back to the landlord or the property manager, and you're texting them, you're calling them, you've submitted whatever their system is to request your deposit back. You've done all those things, and there's been no communication, okay? Or sometimes even better, maybe worse, let's say that they've kept your deposit and they just said, there's damage, there's paint, there's smoke damage, there's willful damage, whatever it might be. Now, before I continue, let's talk about the difference between willful damage and normal wear and tear, okay? I have asked this question multiple times, multiple venues. What is normal wear and tear? I'm going to put this on YouTube, and normal wear and tear, what does that even mean? Okay. Here's the answer. It is a preference, or it is a personal interpretation of what normal wear and tear is. But I can tell you what it isn't. Normal wear and tear is not a punch in one of the doors. It is not a kick in the drywall. That is called willful damage. You've got malicious damage there. It is not knife marks on your countertops. That is called willful damage, okay? Now, if you've got other examples of willful damage, or there's lots and lots of questions of this with pictures on the Facebook forums where you've got newbie landlords or people that are landlords that are in pickle that will say, is this normal wear and tear? How much should I take off the deposit? How much, what should you do? But the difference between normal wear and tear and willful damage is normal wear and tear is just from them living there. So it's just the use of the wall. There might be a scratch on the drywall. There might be, and it depends on how long they've lived there. If they've lived there 6 months and it was brand new carpet when they moved in, and the carpet is absolutely trashed and it cannot be salvaged, well, guess what? There is an argument there that is not normal wear and tear in 6 months. If they were there for 6 years, debatable, right? Debatable. If it's ruined in 6 years, I would argue, why as a landlord, why aren't you in there looking at the carpet as part of annual maintenance? But I wanted to at least throw that in there and say, if there is willful damage, then it should be noted at the time of move out on the condition inspection by both the landlord or property manager and the tenant. Okay, willful damage needs to be noted at the inspection. That's the whole point of this inspection. If there's just normal wear and tear items where things need to be freshened up, it needs to be repainted, maybe I'm just trying to think of some of these items, and usually the tenant will tell the landlord or the property manager at that point, oh, by the way, this heating duct doesn't work, it's plugged. That happened to me this week. And I went, oh, okay, so we need to have that clean, we need to have it looked at. Okay, so let's jump back into the scenario here. You're a tenant, you've moved out, you have not gotten your deposit back yet. You may or may not have done the departure correctly, but now the question is, where is your deposit? That justification, if the landlord or property manager is going to keep your deposit, they have got to have justification of why they've kept the deposit. What, beyond normal wear and tear, what are they keeping the deposit for? Okay, so willful damage for sure. Things like, here's one that I have. I have a fireplace in one of my units, and it says right in the lease, again, written down right in the lease, that at the end of your tenancy, if you have used the fireplace even for 1 minute, it must be professionally cleaned and you've got to give me the deposit at move out. And if you don't, I get to charge you $200 from your deposit. It says right in the lease what to do and how to do it. So just so you're aware. So I already have notion this tenant departed this week with a fireplace in the unit, and they didn't provide this receipt, and I know it wasn't clean. So anyway, I'm dealing with all of that. But that's another thing that could be, you've got to look at your lease and go, based on what's in the unit, what do you have permission in advance to deduct from the deposit? This is one, excuse me, this is one example. So willful damage, again, you want to make sure that at that time of that move out walkthrough, that you have noted some potential areas where, hey, this is willful damage. Hey, you agreed to have the fireplace cleaned. Hey, this door wasn't kicked in when you bought it or when you took the unit, and you've got to do this properly. Okay. If, let me keep going, that if the landlord or the property manager is going to keep the deposit, then they've got to provide the justification in the form of estimates or invoices, meaning for the kicked in door, for the fireplace cleaning, this kind of things. There's a lot of folks out there that have gotten departed tenants, and they've got crayon written all over the walls, all the way into the bathtubs. I mean, I've seen some of the terrible stuff where I just go, oh my gosh, that is willful damage. That, I don't care how you look at that. That is not normal wear and tear. That is willful damage. You need to get an estimate on getting that removed, and take that estimate and either have it done, because you want to get the unit re-rented, right? So get the estimate and say, or the invoice, whichever, deduct that off the deposit, but you've got to properly communicate with the tenant. So as a tenant, if you have not had any justification from your landlord or from your property manager on why they're keeping your deposit, that is a problem. That is a problem. Okay. Now, let me jump into this. You are under the time limit for returning the deposit and or communicating. Again, go back to your local Tenancy Act, your local housing code. There's got to be in there about the deposit, and there is a time limit of how long a landlord has to either communicate or to return the money. And it's very specific. It's very specific. It will say you've got 10 days, or it has to be postmarked by midnight on the 15th day, or I mean, it'll be very specific and very specific to that state, province, or territory. So if you are in this pickle right now where your landlord has kept your deposit, first of all, what day did you move out? And then check your local housing laws and know you need to count the days, because if you end up going to arbitration or to court, the judge will count the days, right? So let's talk more about this. We've in this episode so far, we've gathered some information. We've talked about communication. We talked about willful damage and normal wear and tear. Now, at some point, you take action, right? And at what point is that, where do you take action, and what does that even look like? Well, go back to your local housing code, your Residential Tenancy Act, whatever is applicable, and learn how long it is that the landlord has to return the deposit. And whatever that is, whether it's 30 days or 14 or 15 or 20, every state or province or territory is different. And once you get one day past that day, then you can take action. Okay, now what is the action that you can take? Most of the time in US or Canada, you have to take the landlord or the property manager to small claims court. Remember, the deposit is not rent. The deposit is now part of an asset that the tenant has given the landlord as a promise to behave. So if the landlord is keeping that deposit, the tenant now basically has to sue the landlord to get that money back. Okay. Now, there is a bit of a process to file small claims to get that deposit back. You've got to show all your documents, including the lease, including the condition move-in inspection, and any pictures you might have taken, the condition move-out inspection, any pictures you might have taken, invoices that the landlord may or may not have provided, and either they align or they don't align. And if they don't align and you're making an argument to small claims, most of the time, the courts, because at this point it's escalated to court, you're basically starting a lawsuit. If you're going to have a court rule, then what ends up happening is that they're going to rule in your favor. The landlord has a significant penalty. In the state of Hawaii, if a tenant takes a landlord to small claims court, the penalty is triple the deposit. Triple. Wow. So if the deposit is $2,000, the landlord has to pay $6,000 if they're found in error. This is pretty serious. And then the tenant can actually go after the landlord for that money, especially if they have a judgment. Now, I'm not going to get into how do you actually file its small claims. If you are a tenant and you are in this scenario, please reach out to your local housing authority or your local legal aid or housing nonprofit. Somebody will guide you on how to start the small claims process. I'm not going to go into that in this episode because I want to make sure that you kind of know the high points of how to do this properly and then when to take action. So the action part I'm going to leave for you. In this episode, we went over what to expect when you're doing your move out. You know, did you give your proper notice? Did you do a condition inspection not only at move in and move out? Was it all written down properly? It should have been. We discussed that the deposit is not rent. The difference between willful damage and normal wear and tear. And then if a landlord or property manager is going to keep your deposit, what that looks like and the justification of what that looks like. And if you do not agree, you need to check the timing of how long that landlord or property manager has to give back your deposit. If you feel that you are correct and they are wrong, you can file a claim at small claims. And at that point, you've got to show all your written documentation that you've received to prove that you're right and you earn all of your deposit, all or part of your deposit back. Okay. Call to action. If you're a tenant, even if you're a landlord in this rental business, ladies and gentlemen, you need to know what is the process, but also what is the penalty? How does this all work? I am astounded at how many people are in the rental business and do not know the rules of rental businesses. Unbelievable. So I challenge you, wherever your rentals are, whatever state, province, or territory your rentals are in, jump to that location's residential act or tenancy code, whatever it's called for your area, and you will know what that is, or Google it if you don't. Read it, and what is the process on returning the deposit from the landlord back to the tenant? What is the proper process, and what is the proper time? What is the time? Because there will be a day that you have to provide that deposit back to the tenant, or again, what is the penalty? again, you've got to know the game and play it well. As a tenant, you need to know the rules. As a landlord or property manager, you need to know the rules as well. Okay, so this is the episode. Episode is They Kept My Deposit. I really hope that you learned something. I kind of went on several different rabbit holes in this one, but my goodness, there is a lot of moving parts when you've got a deposit in play here. It's very important. One other note I'm going to throw in here: when I do move out inspections with the tenant, I will always ask, how do you want your deposit returned? Now, and legally, depending on where you are, you're supposed to know their forwarding address. Okay, that's part of the rules. But if they want an e-transfer, or they want a Venmo, or they want a check mailed, where do they want that mailed? How do they want it delivered back to them? That's very important, because once that communication is done and once they've departed your unit, sometimes it can be difficult to communicate with the tenant, especially if things are starting to go sideways, especially about the deposit. Okay, I'm throwing that in there. Let me know your comments, questions on our Facebook group or our YouTube channel, My Life as a Landlord. Thank you, YouTubers, who are watching right now. Know that I create the next podcasts through our comments and questions that you guys all bring up. Next week's podcast topic is real estate development. This is all about improving properties, changing properties. That will be episode number 38. And the title of that episode is Start with the Exit in Mind. Super cool. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next Saturday. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you learned something. And again, if you've got comments, questions, anything, throw it in comments on this YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me.